left, right.
This episode, my friends, has been a long time coming. This episode is about masculinity and whether or not masculinity itself is toxic, or is toxic masculinity something completely different from regular traditional masculinity. So I pose the question to you. Let me know in the comments and enjoy the episode. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right, we are live. This is SipTalk, episode 227. My name is Justin DiGiulio out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Boswell, philosopher, philanderer, philanthropist, a man of many PHs. James, how's it flying there?
We got a tropical storm that's going to miss us, which is unfortunate.
Thank you for the non-news.
Well, it's flying. Like, if the tropical storm were to hit, then stuff would be flying.
Fair enough. And James, a man of the waves, is always tracking tropical storms and impressions and weather patterns, always hoping for good waves there in sunny South Carolina.
I'm always hoping for a hurricane to hit dead on South Carolina. Like, bring a Category 3 with the eye hitting, like with the eye crossing over downtown Charleston.
I don't know about you, but when we were kids, I always was hoping for a snowstorm when I feel like everybody else was like, oh no, we don't want snow.
Well, Mr. Lee.
I always wanted a snowstorm. I mean, I figure if I was a teacher, especially if I was a teacher, I would definitely want a snowstorm.
Well, you remember Mr. Lee's like snow dance, right?
No, not maybe.
It was more like a prayer where he'd like get down on his knees and like go snow, snow. You don't remember that?
Vaguely. So this is a teacher who overtly wanted snow. I mean, it never made sense to me. You get a day off. It's quiet. It's peaceful. You get to do outdoor shit. And sure, you got to shovel some snow. But like, that's
dude, snow days were the best.
Oh fuck! Maybe I'm not mic'd. Oh fuck me!
I can hear you just fine.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
I'm being told my mic may not be, but we can hear you regardless. All right.
Well, then who cares? Like, if you're coming through clean, like, what does it matter?
Default mic. Let's. How's this? Is that any better?
Yeah, it's deeper.
Oh boy, deeper is what I go for.
Yeah.
I've been practicing my adult voice for our episode on masculinity, and that's a good segue into our topic. Our topic is we're back. Toxic genderism, toxic waste, toxicology, toxoplasmosis, Gandhi, toxic avenger, intoxication. Today we are mostly...
I was just trying to come up with as many things that involve the word toxic as possible.
Today we are talking about toxic masculinity and whether or not masculinity is toxic or not. And we're going to, so I think really the reason that we've chosen this topic, I don't know if you noticed this the last couple of episodes, we've really kind of hit this critical threshold where our viewership is kind of borderline too high. So at the point where we have too many viewers, and that's probably why we crashed in the last episode, we just lost, the bandwidth couldn't carry us with so many viewers and listeners. So we really, in an effort to streamline our show and to keep, clarity, and, we like to upload our episodes with kind of crystal clear, high definition. So we have to eliminate some viewers. And to do that, what we're going to do tonight is just piss some people off, unfortunately. And I feel more of the pissing off is going to be done on my part because I don't know where this episode is going, but I just feel myself defending masculinity and not so much. See what happens.
This is basically you just admitting I'm aware that I'm wrong and I'm going to power through it.
I didn't say I'm aware that I'm wrong. I said I'm going to piss some people off, and I feel like the majority of the people that are going to be pissed off, just given I've existed in the last 5 years, the majority of the people are going to be pissed off by masculinity, toxic or not. and the majority of the people are going to be saying, masculinity is bad, manspreading, mansplaining, these are bad things, which I agree with.
Makes me think of another one-liner that I heard. A guy posted, "My wife has been using the term mansplaining wrong. How do I tell her?"
All right. So my question for this episode, because I don't know where to start, really. So my question for you,
I want to start with the article that you had, and
we both have a lot of notes. So should we start with
the question that opened the article?
All right, let me introduce the article. The
Just
article
read the question first.
Well, let me introduce the publication first, because I think
that's relevant.
That might shed some light on maybe implicit bias here. The magazine is called Muscular Development, and I can tell you, I guess probably those who are listening to us and can't see anything, but the woman on the cover of Muscular Development, her biceps, my guess, are probably about 19 inches around, and she is a rather masculine-looking female. And the article is titled, and not that the cover has anything to do with it. I'm just, it's just a pretty brolic-looking young lady. The article is titled, "Is Anti-Masculinity Toxic to Men?" And I had it's not an article; it's in paragraphs, and it's in the legal Q&A section of Muscular Development. I don't know.
Right.
There's
so
any
of all, hold on a second. I think we need to acknowledge, first of all, that this is a magazine being written by meatheads.
Arguably, yes. Although I will note that when I see these magazines, these men's muscle magazines, most of the time the editors are not these brolic steroid using muscleheads. Most of them are fit men, but they're not the kind of brolic veins popping out of their forehead men that you would expect. So usually the editors and a lot of the writers are not on that level.
Hang on a sec. I got to kick the cat out, and I want you to read the actual question that opens up this article.
Okay, well, go ahead. Move the cat. I can see, because we are on video here, that James has a cat wandering around the back of his room here, and I had suspected maybe that the door to his room was closed, and that this was exactly going to happen. So the article titled, "Is Anti-Masculinity Toxic to Men?" And this is a question to the legal team at Muscular Development. The question is, why does it now seem okay to put down traditional masculinity? And I think those that are in my camp with this conversation, that we see a value to traditional masculinity, we feel that aspect of the masculinity is under attack, and that's what we don't like.
Well, the first thing when I read that question, like, what was screaming in my head was objection leading the witness. Because if you were to ask such a question in court, like, the opposing counsel would object, and before the opposing counsel even finished saying what they were about to say, the judge would just hammer down the gavel and say sustained, because it's a terrible question.
Yeah, but I think I've had this conversation with some of my friends. You and I probably have had this conversation about aspects of masculinity being under attack. And I can understand mansplaining being under attack. It's a man interrupting woman. I actually had a meeting this morning. I don't know, there was 18 people in the room and another 15 to 25 people on the Zoom call, and there was a woman in the classroom in the conference room who kept asking questions without raising her hand, and I was inviting input from people, but most people raised their hand, and I said, sure. I called to them when I was finished breathing the last breath of my sentence. I'd finish my sentence and call on them. And there was one instance in particular where she started speaking in the middle of my sentence, and I just continued to speak and spoke over her. And I mean, this went on for probably like 6 or 7 seconds, which in that setting is rather long. And I revisited afterwards and said, look, when you're giving a meeting and somebody just speaks out of turn, woman or not, and I do this for men as well, when you're leading the class, you can't just stop talking and let everybody have the platform. You are leading the platform. And we went on to to use that as an example of authority. And when you're on the phone with your clients and the clients have a million questions, but they're just not being productive, you can't be on the phone for 45 minutes if somebody wants to be on the phone for 45 minutes. And we went on and on and on. But I think most people can understand when man-spreading being under attack or mansplaining being under attack. But I think we're also, a lot of us men are worried about stoicism and competitiveness and other aspects of masculinity also being under attack. And we don't like it.
So the thing about it is you have to define, like, what are the elements of masculinity, and then define what are the elements of what's called so-called toxic masculinity. And I think it's also important to mention that, like, there's not just toxic masculinity, there's also toxic femininity. It gets a lot less press, but it exists. And like I'm going to kind of spoil the ending here, but I think that the issue with both of these has to do largely with people feeling like things are being forced upon them, or there are these rules that they don't agree with that are being enforced, and that those rules don't exist to make things better for anybody. And so it's more about people feeling this bullshit enforcement of norms that they reject.
I can understand challenging the authority based off norms just for the sake of tradition, but the issue is also trying to eliminate norms as if they shouldn't exist, whereas norm is just the definition of kind of the mode, or the kind of most occurring, whatever it might be. I don't think the definition of normal is a subjective one.
No, but it's always going to end up coming down to, if you think about, like, on a continuum from 0 to 100, right? And let's just say 0 is masculine, 100 is feminine, right?
Okay, so we have a spectrum of masculinity and femininity.
Yeah, and we could even break this down into, like, different areas. So, like, competitiveness, like agreeableness, aggressiveness, like showing of emotion, all those things, and they go from 0 to 100 in terms of, like, the most masculine traits, the most feminine traits, right? And so I think the issue is that there are these expected norms of where a man or a woman should fall on that scale in a given situation. And the issue is the norm is going to be, like, how big, if this is your total range here, right? Look, this is your total range, right? So what we're arguing about,
for those of you who are trying to follow James said, look, and then held his hand.
I'm holding up my hands to, like, imagine this is the continuum, right? And so the question is, like, if that's the entire range, then the norm might be this narrow, or this narrow, and it slides. And so the argument isn't, should there be a range? I think everyone would be like, yeah, it's okay to have some kind of a range for what is normal, but how wide should that be? And where should it fall? And I'm basically going to be making the argument that it's probably too narrow, and I think that you're arguing that the narrowness is okay. So,
but I think let's first come to an agreement for the basis of this conversation, right? And I witness a lot of people have arguments where the two are on two different playing fields, okay, trying to have the same argument, but they're both arguing points that will never meet in the middle. So I think for us to have a conversation about masculinity and femininity, we have to agree that there's a spectrum, just as you introduced. And we have to agree that some things are going, so let's call the spectrum blue to pink. All right. So you got blue on the masculine side, and you have pink on the feminine side. Now, we have to agree that a lot of these aspects are going to fall somewhere along the spectrum. Now, where one person may place them and another person may place them could be in different areas. But again, we're going to take the average of where those are being placed. And I think that we can agree that feminine and masculine, you and I at least, are actual, tangible, effectively, uh, ideas and concepts, whereas not everybody's going to agree with us on that statement. You know, there's whole language models that are based on feminine and masculine. So
Yeah, but the thing is, like in Spanish, where you have basically every single noun is gendered, but it doesn't like the concept of a gendered noun in Spanish just means something completely different because like it's la mano, like so hands are feminine, but like it doesn't mean anything. It's not like having hands makes you feminine.
well, I think it's what you do with your hands.
Well,
all right, moving on. All right. I want to touch and then I'll let you take the lead a little bit because you did a lot of research here. You sent me a WebMD article, and it's talking about toxic masculinity. And the WebMD article says the term originally came about during the late 20th century men's movement to describe narrow ideas of masculinity that were holding men back instead of empowering them.
So that's again, we're coming back to that whole narrowness.
Mm-hmm. They consider toxic masculinity a characteristic of immature men who had not yet found their deep spiritual masculinity. This men's movement sought to increase communication or community among men rather than competition, multi-generational bonding, as they felt that the inability to bond with their fathers was a source of emotional damage, and to freely express emotion.
So I think like yeah, there's the whole narrowness thing, and like I think one of the most like if we want to talk about like positive masculinity and like the whole idea of like being secure in your masculinity is being willing to do things that are not traditionally considered masculine and be like, I can do this because I'm secure in my masculinity. An example of this would be like a father going to like a ballet with his daughter because she wants to see the ballet, or a father going to a Taylor Swift concert with his daughter
because he's confident within himself. But confidence arguably may be seen as masculine,
right? But you can be confident in your masculinity enough to be able to do feminine things and say, this doesn't affect who I see myself as a man. For example, I am currently wearing women's socks. Why? Because they fit my feet better. I don't care that they're women's socks.
Well, look, I actually also wear women's socks because I find that the low profile socks stretch out and they end up coming up well above my ankle. So I just buy the women's socks. However, I'm not going to buy women's socks with pink toes and pink lines all over.
Well, that's the color that they came in, and I just don't.
Oh, wait, yours are pink? Yours are actually pink?
Yeah, they're like a light pink. I've got some bright pink ones. Like they're mostly black with like pink highlights. And it was like, you know what? If someone's seeing my socks, then like, and they're pointing out, why are you wearing pink socks? And be like, because women's socks fit me better. That's the size that my feet are. Men's socks stretch out and they're too loose, and I like having tight fitting socks. And then they'd be like, well, why are you wearing women's socks? I'm like, dude, why do you care?
All right. Well,
like I'm confident in my masculinity to have a few items of women's clothing that fit me better. I'm not going to be going around wearing a dress because that's not my game. But
then somebody may argue wearing a dress because you're confident enough to wear a dress is masculine.
Well, I mean, you got kilts, which are basically skirts, and those are considered masculine.
So they're considered masculine because of what they represent, whereas a dress has a different representation. So my question, let me throw a few out there that we've seen increasingly over the last decade. Man buns, or a guy with a ponytail or a guy with a bun.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that just because aesthetically, I just think it looks stupid.
I don't understand, and I'd really like to.
I think for you, it's just because you're jealous.
It could be because I don't have hair, but no, I mean, it makes me question. I see a guy who has hair, and I think, oh shit, that's what you've chosen to do with your hair? That seems like a strange thing to do. Just like I look at somebody, with a car who's got all these accessories on his car, all this chrome things that stick on the car and the fake air intakes, and I go, that could have been a nice car, but look what you've done with it. Yeah, I look at somebody with a full head of hair and say you got a ponytail. Now, for me on the spectrum of blue versus pink, that would seem pretty pink. Also, I've noticed a lot of men wearing bracelets, and in professional men. You know, I go into banks and you know, I meet with a lot of professional people, and to me, it's a little silly to see a guy wearing a suit and wearing some nice dress shoes, you know, and he's got some bracelets around his.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a bracelet and a watch?
Well, the watch arguably is a bracelet in itself. However, it's not strictly jewelry. It has some function. So when you throw a red ribbon around your wrist and call it Kabbalah, and then you throw some beads around your wrist, I don't know what you call it, Yaman Surfer, and then you throw another bracelet around, and that's got some meaning because you saw it in the checkout line at J. Crew. Why are we wearing bracelets? It doesn't make sense. I understand wearing a watch. I get a lot of functionality out of my watch, but wearing some beads in my hand because I saw it in the checkout aisle at J. Crew doesn't seem to add any value. And men bracelets, some people might say that leans more blue, but I'm saying that's just.
I see it as neutral.
I think you've just been tricked into wearing something pink on your wrist. You know, on my list also I have here wimpy handshakes. It was introduced to somebody yesterday, and it was a woman, and most women I meet in business give me a pretty good handshake, and she gave me kind of this, like, just extended her fingers onto my hand. I thought that was a little strange, and that was a woman. And
Kevin says, aren't ties just really long necklaces?
Aren't ties just really long necklaces? So arguably, yes. However, it is baked into our culture that it is a masculine trend.
All right, so you just hit onto something, actually.
Culture.
Which is, we make all these arbitrary distinctions about whether something is masculine or feminine. And as I said, it's completely arbitrary.
Well, I mean, sure. And I would just want to hit Tim Murray's comment here on TikTok. He said, East Indian men wearing their hair in buns is cultural for them. And that's...
Well, and you can look at, like, Sikhs that have, like, their hair in, like, the turban.
Exactly. And that's... and that would be seen as a more masculine thing in that culture. And I think anybody in America that would see that as most Americans would see that as who understand would see that as a more masculine thing. But then you take the dude that grew up in the suburbs in middle America and is now or is living in Brooklyn and wearing some overalls and has some bracelets on his wrist and maybe around his ankles and has a bun. That seems a little funny to me. I just don't see the utility in the bun, you know, whereas I don't see the utility in a watch, or I'm sorry, in a bracelet, but I do the watch.
So my question is, why does any of this matter? Because, like,
well, because
everyone's free to determine what they value. So for you can say that this set of items and behaviors that are viewed as traditionally masculine, those have value to you, right?
I don't necessarily see it as value, but
how can you not?
I see our traditional definition of masculinity slipping and getting confusing, whereas I do see some value in masculinity. And
you're answering my question. I'm trying to get you to admit that you see value in traditional masculinity. Now, I'm not going to be criticizing you for this. What I'm going to be criticizing is saying that just because you find value in it doesn't mean that other people have to.
Okay, now, but again, the issue is really the definition of traditional masculinity.
Actually, it doesn't matter here.
Well, no, I mean,
my argument.
Just hear me out. Traditional masculinity could go back to, you know, when men just freely raped women, right? Like, that's not. I don't think anybody agrees that's a positive. Okay, but there are other elements of masculinity that we've come to hold as traditional, and I think that it could be very clearly a line drawn that there are some aspects of masculinity that are bad. Okay, you know, rape, I'm sure for many millennia was very common. I mean, look at the fucking animal world, and only a couple millennia back, we were effectively just animals. So I can imagine there was a lot of that going on, and less the reverse of women raping men.
Can I finish my argument here, though? Because the thing is, it doesn't matter what the definition of traditional masculinity is. It doesn't matter if your definition of traditional masculinity matches up with a textbook definition or something you find on a website, or is the complete opposite. Because I don't actually care what your definition is for the sake of this argument. My argument is that what you personally define as traditionally masculine, you find valuable. And what I'm saying is that's totally okay. What I have an issue with is that we as a society, I don't think, should be judging people when their behaviors that work for them don't match up with our own personal beliefs, and us saying you should be doing this because you're a man, or you should be doing this because you're a woman. So whatever your definition of traditional masculinity is, and you see that as a positive and you value that, that's all good. Where I have an issue is saying other people should be doing these things too because they have value. They have value to you. They don't by necessity have value to others.
Okay, so I want to, and I will agree with you there. And we have Tim Murray here, who said African men wear bracelets and anklets as a symbol of masculinity. And again, that may be specific to their culture, and that's very much and I'm not saying it's not masculine. So again,
you were, though,
to a degree, but I'm allowing for perspective and context.
And what I'm trying to
what I'm saying is that
perspective and context just needs to be expanded greatly.
When I see a dude in Brooklyn with a beard and a flannel shirt and some overalls on, okay, that doesn't strike me as masculine, because I know for a fact he's probably not chopping wood and building things, right? And that's where the conflict is. I want to read two passages, one from the National Library of Medicine, which I think is a link that you sent, and another one from theconversation.com. Both of them dealing with traditional masculinity. And the first one, National Library of Medicine, is defining traditional masculinity in regards to aggression. And I'm just introducing these paragraphs for the sake of some fodder for us to talk about, really. Traditional masculinity includes norms that encourage many of the aggressive behaviors, whereas traditional femininity emphasizes aggression very little. In addition, the lack of emotional regulation as well as a poor impulse control have been related to aggression, and in particular with reactive and proactive aggression. Aggression is defined as behavior with the intent to harm oneself or others, and is common behavior problem in adolescence. Reactive aggression is a reaction to a provocation or a threat, real or imagined. Moreover, it relates to low cognitive planning, impulsiveness, or intense emotional activation. Proactive aggression is characterized by emotional detachment and emotional callousness. It is about an instrumental aggression related to a way of acting in which the end justifies the means. So what they're saying is that masculinity has to do with aggression, and that there are two types of aggression. One is reactive, the other is proactive.
And I think that kind of leads us more along the lines of, I think, masculinity versus femininity in like kind of a traditional Western sense is that men take an active role and women take a passive role. Well, and men need to be aggressive, because if a woman is trying to take an active role, as a man, you need to be the one who is in control. And that means that, like, you need to be active. And if she's trying to be the active decision maker or whatever, that's where the aggression comes in, is you need to say, no, I'm making the decisions. And I think that's part of the toxicity of it, is that it leads to these unequal relationships and disparate treatment of people.
Well, I think if the reactivity is aggressive, or the proactivity is aggressive, and aggressive in this paragraph defined as a behavior with intent to harm oneself or others, right? Yeah, but in your scenario, it's harming the other, right, by suppressing them.
Okay.
But again, the thing is, when we talk about masculinity, what we're really having a conversation about underlyingly is people's perception of masculinity, which are not always the same, which is why people have these arguments that they're on different playing fields effectively. So I bring this paragraph up, and then you talk about men overtaking women for the sake of masculinity, which I wouldn't necessarily have seen that as related to aggression, which is
Well,
what that
you have to
paragraph
act
was about.
aggressively to retake the initiative when if you have this toxic masculine attitude that women can't make decisions over men, and there's a woman that's trying to make a decision and trying to get you to go along with it, you might have to react aggressively against that to retake the initiative. And I'm not advocating for this. I'm highlighting this as an aspect of toxic masculinity.
So let me read the statement from the conversation.com. By the way, I read the articles that you sent me, and I found a few more articles. Now, when I say read, I read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. So I'm joking, but most of these are just in the beginning of these articles. This was on the conversation.com and is somewhat in line with the song that you sent me, what was the name of the band?
King Missile.
King Missile, which is actually a really, really funny band. And the song, I don't know the name of it. What was the name of the song?
Gay, not gay.
Gay versus not gay. And so the music was terrible and it was painful to listen to, but the lyrics were funny. So, but this statement is actually somewhat in line with that song. The conversation.com's men's homophobia and misogyny can be framed as traditional masculinity. Yet when men sacrifice their comforts and health to provide for family or to give their lives to defend their country, this is regarded as traditional masculinity as well. The term has many meanings, yet these meanings are rarely explained. What are we talking about? When we refer to traditional masculinity, which tradition do we have in mind? The Buddhist Bodhisattva vow, the commitment to put others before oneself, the Jewish tradition of Nidha, where men can't hold hands or hug their wives during the week of menstruation? Or do we think of the famous English stiff upper lip? The wide spectrum of masculinities in any society alongside a plethora of cultural traditions. So again, a lot of this goes back to cultural traditions and just kind of culture in general when we talk about masculinity. And again, are some of these things toxic? Is it toxic to oneself as a man, or is it toxic to others?
Well, in some respects it is, because like think about this, and like I'm guilty of this, and I'm probably not going to change, but like I won't go to the doctor unless I feel like I am actively dying. Like
So
I haven't had a checkup in years. I hate going to the doctor with a burning passion. And that's seen as an aspect of toxic masculinity, because like let somebody help you. And for me, I'm just like, no, I'm not going to spend money to hear what I already know.
So again, but that also helps when you already know, because you specifically are an intelligent person when it comes to going to the doctor. Now, do you think that's ingrained? And I'll give you an example of myself in just a minute. But do you think that is ingrained with a man's drive to sacrifice their own comfort for the greater good, or to give their lives to defend the country, or for whatever better good? Do you think that's ingrained in a man, that they put other needs ahead of their own physical well-being?
I think that is a result of socialization. And if you want to trace it way, way back, there's probably a biological basis for this, which is, let's say you've got a small society and we're talking primitive times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order for that society to continue, you got to have kids, because people are going to die. Now,
yep.
How many kids can a woman have?
Well, you're supposed to have the adage is you're supposed to have 6 kids, because 2 will die as children or in childbirth, 2 will die in war, and 2 will go on to propagate your family.
All right, so but like let's just think about this in terms of like what's the rate of child production that a woman can have? And the answer is roughly 1 every about 9 months, right?
Okay. What's
the rate that a man can produce children?
At much greater rate.
I'd say once per 9 minutes. So
okay.
if you have a village and you've got 50 men and 50 women, and you had to say, we're going to wipe out 49 of you, and what are your best odds for keeping that village going? If you wipe out 49 of the women, you're in really bad shape. If you lose 49 of the men, you'll probably pull through. Now, the ideal ratio is probably like lose 30 men and lose 10 women, so that way you still have like some genetic diversity in the village. But the point is that from an evolutionary or biological standpoint, men are expendable much more so than women. And so
that's what I'm saying. Is this ingrained in you, maybe, to sacrifice yourself and your?
But I think it's ingrained because as soon as people as soon as like humans evolved the capacity for some kind of rational thought and societal organization, they very quickly realized that women were more valuable than men when it came to keeping the society going. And so when there were dangerous things that needed to be done, they would have a man do it because the man was easier to replace. And that history carries from 10,000 years ago to today, in that men are more expendable than women because you need less men than you need women to rebuild a population.
I want to hit Matt Wall's comment on TikTok in just a second, but I don't necessarily think that it, just to finish my point, that that's ingrained in us. But I think
it's a societal legacy of primitive times.
Sure, societal legacy, but again, are men standing up and saying I'm more masculine because I'm not going to the doctor? So I'll give you an example, and this will lead into Matt Wall's comment about men in overalls and location. I was chopping down some trees in the front of my house, and I thought it would be great exercise to use an axe, which indeed it was. But there was a lot of trees, and some of them were pretty damn big. And I ended up injuring my shoulder, which, I had known that it was probably a torn rotator cuff, and the treatment for that is surgery, and then you don't use it very much, and then you can basically, it has to heal, and then you could just never really use it, and you may lose the range of motion that you once had. And the non-treatment aspect of it, if I didn't get seen, what you do is you stay off it, don't use it, let it heal, and then just always go easy on it after that. So the utility of going to the doctor and having them tell me my two options and then choosing either of the options was basically zero, because I had those options without going to the doctor, and it was the same outcome. You follow me? So on the notion of cutting down trees, Matt Wall says, or moreover asks, so a guy in overalls in Brooklyn is false, but a guy in overalls in Iowa is legit. Now, what I did say was overalls and a what did I say? I know you're on mute, so it's not very helpful for me.
I'm responding to Rosh about something.
All right, so what did I say? A guy in overalls with a beard and a flannel shirt in Brooklyn, I would say is false, versus a guy in Iowa with overalls and some lager boots on, if he is indeed wearing overalls to protect himself from whatever debris, and he's wearing
from the falling corn.
From the falling, I mean, yeah, there's probably not a lot of trees being chopped down in Iowa, but really, my point is just that the guy in Brooklyn is dressed as something else, and that arguably would be false. It's a style to him versus the guy who's actually chopping down trees or doing whatever work. It's actually utility to dress like that. I don't know about the beard. The beard is
but like, I mean, what does it really matter? Because like, let's just come up with a crazy example. You're out in your front yard chopping down a tree with an axe. Okay. And in one example, you're wearing
overalls, by the way.
Right, but let's just say you're wearing blue jeans and a plaid shirt.
Okay.
And let's say in another example, you're wearing a mini skirt.
Okay.
What's the difference?
Well, I think the mini skirt would be absolutely absurd. Whereas wearing some clothes to protect myself and some thick boots and some denim to protect myself, probably a good idea. Also, wearing protective eyewear, a good idea. These are clothing options with utility. Now, if I happen to stroll through Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I see a guy wearing protective eyewear, and he's eating a vegan burger at a cafe, I'm going to look at the guy and say,
okay, well, so I mean, if we're going to go to the extremes of like people acting in patently absurd ways, and Brooklyn's a great place to go for this, then like, But I don't want to. I don't want to get lost in the extremes of one side or the other, because like you can go to some places where people just do dumb and weird things, and like it's easy to make fun of, but at the same time they're not really harming anybody, so who cares? But I don't think those are good
Sure, but
examples to use for this discussion.
okay, but I mean, when it comes to masculinity, and are we taking away from masculinity if somebody is faking it?
I don't know. Like, here, let me ask you this one, because like I came up with a list of like you're not a man if you, and you're not a woman if you, and came up with like some toxic things that like what toxic masculinity would say is like you're not a man if you, and toxic femininity, you're not a woman if you. And so like I mean, and I've heard all of these, literally every single one of these. Like I didn't have to like make up any of this. This was just things that I have seen in my own life. So like you're not a man if you don't want to have children.
Okay, I wouldn't say.
I'm not saying you would. I'm not saying you've said this.
But again, this is cultural, and you're in a particular area of the country, whereas a lot of New Yorker men specifically don't want children. But all right, so run down the list. I'll try to.
You're not a man if you cry or you show too much emotion.
Well, okay. So look. My question to that would be, if you're looking for leadership, and I'm not saying leadership needs to be by a man, but I do expect some masculine qualities to a leader. And my question would be, who do you want leading you into adversity? The person that's crying because their emotions are overwhelmed, or the person that is stoic?
Well, it's still contextual, because like the question becomes, when is it okay to cry? Because you could ask this to a man or a woman, and you could say, okay, you just lost your child. Is it okay to cry? Most people would probably say yes, man or woman.
But then I would ask, what value is that crying doing for you?
I don't think anybody that's ever cried has been like, this is so valuable to me right now. Well, no, there's people that have said
no.
That,
I mean, I remember being a kid and the adults saying, "Stop crying. What are you crying for?" And actually,
right, but like for the most part, like I don't think people are crying because like they feel that it has value.
I think most people are crying
a reaction to an emotional an emotional stimulus.
It's an emotional stimulus that somebody can't handle, and they become overwhelmed with the emotion. And I think emotion irregulation is an unstable thing. And if I want somebody leading me,
but what I'm saying is,
I'm not saying crying doesn't have a place, but what I'm saying is that I would rely, if I was looking for someone to lead me, I would want more of a stoic and more of a rationalist than someone who's reacting to emotion.
Right, but you're conflating things, because the qualities that you want in a leader are not necessarily masculine or feminine. They're qualities of a leader. Well, there may be some overlap with masculine traits, but there's definitely some feminine traits that you would want in a leader too. But
what I'm saying is simply that I don't think that crying on the spectrum of masculine to feminine lands on the masculine side.
It certainly doesn't. But what I'm saying is that toxic masculinity is, you're not a man if you cry. And
I will on that platform alone, I'll agree with you. And
so I'm talking about, these are ideas that are actively harmful to men. That as a man you cannot cry.
All right. And hit the rest of this list here.
Right. Like, you're not a man if you don't drink, or you won't do drugs. You're not a man if you aren't athletic in some way.
All men do heroin.
No, but like booze or cigarettes or something, like being able to tolerate and tolerate some amount of drugs and be able to still like function normally is considered manly, and that's toxic. Like, you aren't athletic. You aren't good at repairing things or working with your hands or being like just quote unquote handy. You're not a man if you're gay. You're not a man if you like bright colors, floral patterns, tight clothes, stuff like that. You aren't a man if you aren't into cars or hunting or fishing or grilling. You're not a man if you have fear of anything. And like all of these, like it's okay to be afraid of shit. I'm terrified of spiders, and I'm comfortable admitting that.
But I think the issue is where you fall on. So where you fall on the scale of masculinity, where you fall on the scale of manhood. Now, I don't think that if you fall on the very far end of that scale, that you are particularly a good man. I think you need to fall somewhere between 55 and 85 maybe.
Right, but what I'm saying is but your idea of masculinity shouldn't apply to other people. What your idea of masculinity should apply to yourself.
But all fine, fair, and well. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I also think that the conversation that we're having now may more so explain the rise in non-binary people, because it can get confusing. And I'm not saying that all non-binary people are confused. Don't misunderstand.
It's more like the concept itself is confusing.
But the concept of masculinity, and I will tell you something that
Kevin says worrying about where you fall on the scale of masculinity is itself toxic masculinity. To which I agree.
Well, worrying about where you fall on the scale, yeah, I don't. Yeah. It would never occur to me to ask myself where do I land on that spectrum.
I actually know this answer for myself. And like I took a personality test that I didn't realize was going to like score it this way, but like at the end it scored and it like gave various personality traits, and it gave like a ratio of masculine and feminine traits. Mm-hmm. Take a guess where I landed.
51.9.
You're off. It was like low 70s, maybe like 72.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was joking. But look, so the thing is, and this is where maybe I'm understanding it more, is that, in this kind of gender fluidity zeitgeist we've had in the last few years, I can understand a man wanting to be a woman. I can understand a woman wanting to be a man, right? But I haven't been able to wrap my head around the non-binary. I don't really want to be either, right?
Well, I think it's one of two things, and one of them is I don't want to be held to a standard of either masculinity or femininity. That I can understand.
Well, and that's where I'm going. So maybe now I still don't understand it, but I'm able to wrap my head around it, right? And
the other one is like I don't want to identify as a man or a woman. That one's harder for me to wrap my head around.
Well, that's
I don't want to be held to. Yeah, but I think a lot of people that are non-binary would say, I just don't want to be held to the traditional standards of man or woman. So there's one where like I don't want to identify as a man or a woman, period. The other is I just don't want to be held to the standards of either. And I think the standard one, that's easier for me to understand. It's just like, fuck it, I don't want to have to like be told what I can and can't do. Like, maybe I'll wear a dress tomorrow.
That would be strange.
It would be strange, but that's what non-binary people want, is just to be able to do what they feel like doing without being judged.
And there was a comment way back on either Instagram or TikTok about it sounds like you two guys are just judging people. I don't know where the anti-judgment movement, it hasn't been popular lately. You don't hear it, but I would say maybe 11 years ago, it was people, shame on you if you judged someone. But I think that's literally what humans do, is they classify, and they classify through judgment.
It's impossible not to go through a day without judging things. It's impossible to do.
So as long as you recognize what your what's the word I'm looking for? Prejudices are, right? What your inherent prejudices are. But that's, people judge, and that's just how life goes. And you can't say shame on you for judging. Now, if their judgment is wrong, and maybe it is stereotyped or prejudice, and their action therefore is a wrong action, then shame on them. But just simply having judgments and observations, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Do you want to hit the toxic femininity?
And I mean, this one I kind of just came up with on my own. Like, I read through the article. But like,
oh God, I was really hoping these weren't yours. Ugh.
Well, these are all things that I've heard.
Okay,
like, this is not me saying. These are not my opinions, by the way. These are just me like parroting things that I have heard.
All right, so your first one is you're not a woman if you don't want children. And it's funny because your toxic masculinity first trait was you're not a man if you don't want children. So I suppose if you don't want children, you're neither man nor woman, which actually has a sticking point. If you don't want children, are you then a I was going to say heterosexual, but
neuter.
But I heterosexual is not exactly where I wanted to go with that statement.
But like I would go even further with women. So like, for like, I'd say toxic masculinity is like you're a man, you should want to pass on your seed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what toxic masculinity would say. And you're not a man if you don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for women, it's you're not a woman if you don't desire to have that nurturing experience of raising a child. But also, like, I think toxic femininity goes a step further and says you're not a woman if you don't like being around children.
You don't like children, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, women are more nurturing. Women are more likely to be teachers.
And so, like, you're not a woman, like, again, like lesbian. So, like, yeah, you're not a woman if you like other women. Like, women are supposed to like men and men are supposed to like women. That's just how things are. Then, so, like you're not a woman if you have defined muscles because women aren't supposed to be, like, super athletic or built.
I showed you the cover of that magazine.
Mm-hmm. Like, you're not a woman if you have small breasts or you have short hair or you won't wear traditionally female clothes like dresses or skirts or bras. You're not you're not a woman if you're super promiscuous because you're supposed to be like protecting your chastity.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and this is something like when the topic of slut shaming comes up and like people get mad at men about it, I always laugh because women slut shame other women way more than men do.
That is true. But so it doesn't sound so much to me that I wouldn't argue that because a girl plays sports or has small breasts or is muscular that she's not a woman.
But it's more.
I would argue a degree of femininity, and I think it would be difficult to have the counter argument against mine. But
well, it's more like you're less feminine if you do these things.
Yeah, but again, not a woman. And
and maybe I should have rephrased it to you are less feminine if you blank. But now we're getting into like nomenclature.
Okay. Now, I think there are varying degrees of challenging masculinity and femininity. So if you have a boy and you say toughen up, you know it's just a bruise, you're all right, don't cry. That's empowering. Whereas if you tell a girl she's a slut or a whore, that's tearing down. And I think those are different things. You know, one, and not because one is feminine, one's masculine. I'm sure there are feminine things you could say as well that wouldn't be tearing down, but would rather be empowering towards that end of the spectrum. Fair enough. I'm going to not engage with those comments. So I will read Matt Wall, who's been following us for a little while on TikTok, and thank you guys on TikTok for following us. Don't forget to subscribe to SipTalk podcast on YouTube or the audio podcast platforms. Little plug. But Matt Wall said, "This is why everyone hates dads and dad's side of the family." I didn't think it was a thing to hate dads.
It is.
It is?
Hold on. There's a comma in there if you're going to transcribe my thoughts.
It is comma after is where
like I think there's a certain type of dad that people like grew up with, that certain people grew up with that they didn't like, and that was like the super distant dad or the angry dad, where like you didn't even want to talk to your dad because all he would do is just get angry that you're bothering him. And so that's where it comes from, is like this basically dad that never wanted to be a dad. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but I feel like that was also men from a long while back, right? Like if you take our parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? The man had very little to do with child rearing and child caring had anything to do with the house. The man was a provider. The woman was the caretaker, took care of the home and the children. So the man was very much hands off, and then also therefore distant to a degree with the children. You know, and men aren't not that men don't have that capacity,
but like spending a lot of time with your kids is considered to be a more feminine thing, and that's an aspect of like toxic, well, genderism, because like men are discouraged from spending a lot of time building a relationship with their kids because that's not masculine.
I don't necessarily think that they're discouraged from it. I just think
less so today, but I would say in the past, very much so.
I don't think so. I think they are encouraged to do other things at a stronger rate, because
which means that they're discouraged. That you only have so much time. So if you're encouraged to do one thing over another, that means you're discouraging the thing that you're forgoing.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, though.
But they are. Time is mutually exclusive.
That aspect of the argument, yes, but
that's the entire argument.
I think there's a lot more time, though. I think time can be made and taken from other things, which is why spending more time working doesn't mean spending less time always
but
playing with your kids.
If you're sitting in the lounge chair with the beer watching the football game instead of playing with your kids because that's what you want to do, you can think about 1960s stereotypical dad.
But my point is, I don't think anyone is encouraging that.
No, but it used to be.
I mean, I wasn't around in the 60s.
Neither was I.
I have watched a lot of Mad Men, but that also goes back to the traditional men, and Jess says this in TikTok. She said, because men provide, but traditionally men were the providers. That's not the case anymore. I mean, it's still, traditionally the case, but traditionally it was the men that worked and the women that took care. And now that's obviously changing. So as the women now provide more, men need to step up their game on the other fronts.
Let me ask you this question. Is that a bad thing? That men are no longer like considered to have the responsibility of being the provider?
Well, in terms of, if you break it down to an efficiency model, right? What's the best way to raise a family and sustain life? You break it down to an efficiency model, and this is just for the sake of the argument. And we can move on from here. Think about it like an assembly line. Each person has their own duties. One person doesn't build a car. One person puts the tire on the car.
Yeah.
The next person does this. So if the man has one duty and the woman has one duty.
So the natural follow-up to that question is, if I accept the assembly line argument, then my next objection would be, what's to say that the woman works and the man stays at home?
You play to your strong points. Maybe the woman has a better job, and that's where the traditionalism kind of.
But being a stay-at-home dad is not traditionally masculine.
No, I didn't say it is. Sounds like a great job. But I don't know. That was a joke. We have roughly a minute and a half left. I don't feel like we're bringing this home, but I also don't feel like we went out too far. I don't think we disagreed that much. You didn't defend men's bracelets as much as I thought you would, although you did defend men's socks a little more than I thought you might have. I'm sorry, women's socks. Even though we are both wearers of women's socks.
I'm just saying that, like,
how do we bring this
criticizes my socks? Like, I'm gonna tell him to fuck off.
How do we bring this one home? Where are we bringing this home from?
Well, I think we need more time on this.
Well, we'll let the time run here. We're in possession, and any plugs you got here? You want to plug our podcast? Again, on YouTube or any audio podcast platform. Should we plug the book? You read the book, right?
Well,
you saw it.
Yeah, I didn't have time to go through all of it. Like, how about you do the plugs, and I'll try and think about, like, I feel like we need more time on this. Like, we're still in the middle of the discussion and trying to come up with some kind of like conclusion here, and we haven't addressed all the points yet.
All right. All right. So the book is called Beyond Human Conception: How Artificial Intelligence Perceives Our World, a visually immersive experience of people, places, things, and concepts. The book is available on Amazon in hardcover, softcover, and on Kindle. Check it out. On that note, we are out of time, so I am going to log us off. I want to thank everybody for joining, and say adios. And I'll bring us offline. Sorry, folks, we're still online. Thanks for coming. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Adios, adios. All right, that completes this episode. You made it the whole way. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, YouTube, any audio podcast platform. And that way, we'll see you next time.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.